The photographs told one story. Shannon beaming beside her daughters. Chris standing behind them, arms gently draped over his wife's shoulders. Social media painted a canvas of stability. Family dinners, school runs, planned vacations. She shared everything. Every moment, every milestone, every memory, recorded and posted, as if to say, "This is my life, and I'm proud of it." But in between those polished moments, reality was beginning to shift. Chris had started to change. Subtly, then all at once. The weight loss. The new workout routine. A sudden obsession with his phone. He grew distant. Quiet. Shannon told friends he was sleeping in a different room. He barely touched her anymore. When she asked if he was okay, he said he was just tired. Always tired. Meanwhile, at work, he had become close to someone new. Nichol Kessinger. She worked in the environmental department at Anadarko, the same oil company where Chris had been employed for years. Their relationship began with casual conversation. Small talk during safety briefings. Glances across the office floor. Then text messages. Lunches. Hours spent together in places Shannon never knew existed. By June, they were seeing each other regularly. Nichol believed Chris was separating from his wife. That he was sleeping in the basement. That the marriage was ending. Or at least, that's what she told investigators later. But the timing doesn't lie. Because while Shannon was planning gender reveals and baby showers, Chris was deleting messages. Clearing search histories. Visiting her less. Answering calls with clipped responses. When he was home, he wasn't present. When he wasn't home, he never said where he'd been. Nichol began researching wedding dresses. Searching how much Amber Fry had profited from the Scott Peterson case. Looking up the names of celebrities who'd once been mistresses. Hours of content consumed, about murders. About cover-ups. About hiding from the press. And Chris? He was already making plans. What he didn't expect, what he couldn't control, was Shannon's intuition. She knew something wasn't right. She told friends. She wrote it down. She begged him to tell her the truth. She pressed harder every day. In late July, she flew to North Carolina with the girls to visit family. Chris was supposed to join them later. When he finally did, something had changed. He was cold. Uninterested. Refused to be intimate. Shannon texted a friend that he hadn't even touched her. The clock was ticking. He had 2 lives. And only one could continue. What happened next wasn't spontaneous. It was practiced. Precise. And still, one part of the story never sat right. Because throughout the unraveling of this case, one question was always whispered, never shouted: what role did Nichol Kessinger really play? What did she expect from the man she called her future? And why, after everything, did she disappear almost as quickly as she had entered the spotlight? They met in the most ordinary way. 2 coworkers passing each other in hallways, exchanging casual glances. He was quiet. She was curious. His ring was still on his finger, but his stories were always the same. The marriage was ending. They were sleeping in different rooms. He was going through something difficult, but it was almost over. Nichol Kessinger listened. Then she started asking questions. He told her the baby wasn't planned. That Shannon had pushed him into it. That he felt trapped. That he didn't feel love anymore. Over lunch, they talked about the future. On walks, he opened up about his past. And when she started showing up in his search history, it became clear, this wasn't just an affair. He was trying to become someone else. They sent each other playlists. He told her she made him feel alive again. That she was the one he wished he had met first. He didn't call her a mistress. He called her his peace. His second chance. She told him she wanted a simple life. No chaos. No drama. No baggage. Then she asked, "Have you told her yet?" Every time he said, "Soon." When Shannon left town that summer, he used the space to pretend the marriage had already ended. He brought Nichol to his home. Slept in his own bed with her. Cooked meals. made plans, showed her family photos, then told her they were in the past. He told her he didn't recognize that version of himself anymore. He told her she had changed him. And she believed him. Or she wanted to. She Googled wedding dresses, baby names, how to prepare for a life with a man who already had children. Then, suddenly, searches shifted. How to erase phone records. How long deleted texts stay on a device. She searched Shanann's name over and over, even before the police were looking for her. And still, she kept calling him. The night after the girls were gone, she talked to him for over an hour. His voice was steady. She didn't hear panic. She didn't hear guilt. He told her everything was fine. That they were just working through things. That it was almost over. And she went to sleep. The next day, she called again. He answered again. They talked about normal things. She didn't mention the family. He didn't bring them up. It was a void between them, silent, intentional, sharp. And then something shifted. She watched the news. The names across the bottom of the screen. The footage of Chris standing on the porch, arms folded, begging for his family to come back. The words he used. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his voice caught only when he spoke about himself. Nichol stopped answering the phone. She deleted her texts. She wiped her search history. But the timeline remained. And in that timeline, something couldn't be ignored. Chris didn't snap. He made choices. Small, deliberate, layered choices that all moved in one direction. And at the center of those choices was her. Did she ask for it? No. Did she suggest violence? No. But did she want Shanann gone? She said no. She said she didn't even know Shanann was pregnant. She said she never pushed him to leave. She said she never asked for anything. But the internet says otherwise. Searches don't lie. Phone logs don't forget. And a man who once seemed incapable of rage now sits in a maximum security prison, saying things that no longer make sense. He claims he was under a spell. He says he wasn't in control. He says he saw things in Nichol's eyes that terrified him. No one believed that. Not the judge. Not the jury. Not even Nichol. But what if control doesn't always look like shouting? What if it looks like a whisper? A carefully timed question. A moment of withholding approval. A silence that says more than words ever could. He wanted her. He wanted the life she represented, free of his past, free of expectations. And when she began asking, even softly, for that life to begin, he made a decision. Now he wears the jumpsuit. And she has vanished. Name changed. Face obscured. Location unknown. But the story isn't finished. Because when someone disappears from headlines that quickly, it's rarely by accident. In the early days of their relationship, Nichol said Chris seemed soft. Gentle. Quiet. A man who didn't interrupt. Who listened. Who moved through the world like he was carrying weight he never spoke of. She said he never raised his voice. Never showed anger. She liked that. But he was also something else. Easily influenced. Eager to be accepted. And once she began pulling away, once the questions started piling up, and the glow of their connection faded, he did whatever he thought would make her stay. Chris told investigators that he made the decision in minutes. But that was a lie. This wasn't a flash of rage. This was staged. Clean. Covered. He sent text messages after it was done. Deleted photos. Disposed of the bodies with mechanical detachment. Clocked into work. Smiled at his coworkers. He even brought lunch. He thought it was behind him. But the evidence was stacking up. The search logs. The deleted texts. The security footage. The phone pings. His own words unraveling under pressure. Each version of the story collapsing under the weight of its own holes. And then, he broke. It wasn't in the courtroom. It wasn't in front of flashing cameras. It was in a cold interrogation room, alone, staring at the floor while detectives waited. That's when he confessed. Not to a crime of passion. Not to a fight. But to something much darker. He described how he ended Shanann's life while she begged him to stop. How he wrapped her body in a sheet. How he walked past Bella and Celeste afterward and said nothing. Drove with them still alive in the back seat. And then, one by one, silenced them forever. The officers didn't speak for several seconds. They didn't need to. What Chris said next was worse. He said he thought about his new life with Nichol as he did it. That he pictured what it would be like to wake up with her and not have to lie. That he wanted to be free. Freedom. That was the word he used. Not grief. Not remorse. Not fear. Freedom. And still, even with the confession, some things didn't add up. Why did he call Nichol again right after it happened? Why did she search for ways to avoid media exposure before the bodies were found? Why were her statements filled with contradictions? First saying she didn't know Shanann was pregnant, then admitting she saw it on Facebook, then saying she forgot. And then there were the emails. Leaked months later. Unconfirmed, buried quickly. But they suggested contact between her and Chris's legal team. Questions about immunity. Requests to suppress information. Mentions of sealed transcripts that were never made public. When reporters tried to follow up, the trail went cold. Nichol had vanished. No interviews. No statements. No public breakdown. She was there, and then she wasn't. Some believe she was protected. Others think she ran. But no one can explain how a woman with no criminal charges, no accusations of direct involvement, disappeared so completely. No job records. No address. No trace. As if she'd rehearsed it. Chris is serving 5 life sentences. He talks now. Often. Tells stories that contradict themselves. He's blamed evil forces. Nightmares. Demons. Then, in other moments of clarity, he admits the truth. It was selfishness. Cowardice. Control. Yet he always returns to her. He still mentions Nichol. He says she was his peace. His escape. His beginning. And that raises a question no one wants to answer. Was he trying to impress her? Or was he trying to please her? Because for all her denials, for all her claims that she wanted nothing to do with his family, there's one detail that refuses to disappear. Nichol Kessinger once told Chris what she wanted to. Give him a son someday. The same words Shanann used, just weeks before she died. Coincidence? Maybe. But in stories like these, where the lies outnumber the facts, where timelines blur and motivations are rewritten, coincidence always leaves a stain. And behind that stain is a silence that's never been explained. When the courtroom doors closed behind him, Chris Watts became inmate number 674796. No cameras. No press. No social media feed to curate. Just a cell, and the memories he could no longer filter. But outside, the world was still asking questions. People weren't just shocked by what he had done, they were haunted by why. Because the pieces didn't line up the way they should. Not for a crime like this. Not for the calculated disposal. Not for the silence during the search. Not for the calm interviews. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was something colder. And at the center of every lingering doubt, her name always returned. Nichol Kessinger. She insisted she had no part in the crime. No prior knowledge. She said she ended things as soon as she found out the truth. But that truth, for her, seemed to arrive far too late. And when investigators reviewed every message, every search, every call, they noticed something. She had stopped asking questions long before the world did. When Shanann was missing, she didn't call the police. She didn't ask Chris where his family was. She didn't press for answers. She asked about media coverage. Her name. Her image. She was worried, but not about them. And then she was gone. No statements since. No interviews. No appearances. The most searched woman in America vanished. The official word was witness protection. A new identity. a life away from the spotlight for her safety. But no official agency ever confirmed that. No records were made public. No paperwork surfaced. She had simply stepped out of the story, but the outline of her figure still remained. She had been the last person to hear his voice before the murders. The last person he contacted after they were gone. The only person he kept calling as the walls closed in. And that alone has kept her name alive, on message boards, in podcast episodes, in YouTube documentaries, in police files stamped and buried beneath red tape. Chris Watts has never fully explained his motives. He's given reasons, excuses, fragmented stories. But the one name that always comes back, no matter which version he tells, is hers. Some say she was just the excuse he needed. Others believe she was the reason. There are still things sealed in the discovery file. Pages blacked out. Records withheld. Conversations that were never released to the public. People claim to have seen unedited footage, raw interviews, unreleased transcripts. They say Nichol was questioned longer than reported. That she broke down. That she said something that couldn't be aired. We may never know. But one thing is certain. This wasn't a simple affair. This wasn't a man pushed too far. This wasn't a family that just fell apart. It was methodical. It was built day by day, through glances, whispers, deleted messages, and quiet agreements never spoken aloud. He wanted freedom. She wanted simplicity. And somewhere in the space between those two desires, a family disappeared. Chris Watts sits in a prison cell today, pacing the same floor, reading the same letters, replaying the same story. A story that no longer belongs to him alone. Because true crime doesn't end with a sentence. It lingers. In the silence. In the shadows. In the people who walk away untouched. Nichol Kessinger is free. She walks under a different name. And though her footprints were never found at the scene, her presence is in every inch of it. Every choice. Every cover-up. Every lie. Because in this story, innocence isn't about the absence of blood. It's about what was known. When it was known. And what was never said out loud. Some truths don't need to be proven to be believed. And some endings never really close. Because the most haunting part of this case is that even now, the person who changed everything for Chris Watts has never once looked back. And maybe that's what scares people the most. He had nothing left. No family. No future. No voice that anyone trusted. The story had been told. The world had judged. And yet, from inside a prison cell, Chris Watts still had more to say. More than what he had shared with detectives. More than the courtroom had heard. Because when the cameras disappeared and the doors locked behind him, something changed. He started writing. He wasn't writing to the public. Not to his parents. Not to Shanann's family. He was writing to a woman named Sherilyn Cadle. A writer. A stranger. Someone he believed would listen. In these letters, pages of his slanted handwriting, smudged ink, and corrections scratched out in frustration, Chris began to open up about things he hadn't said before. Details. Feelings. Confessions he had carefully kept hidden. And one name returned again and again. Nichol. He didn't refer to her as Kessinger anymore. He didn't call her his mistress. He called her Nikki. He wrote about how she made him feel alive again. How he had never felt a connection like that with anyone. He talked about the affair not as a mistake, but as something transformative. Something that made him believe he could start over. Leave everything behind. He said he saw signs. He called her his light. His rebirth. He even claimed that she knew things. That she was different. That she would appear in his dreams before he even met her. He wrote as if she had been placed in his life with purpose. Fate. As if losing everything else was worth it to have found her. Then the letters shifted. Chris began describing something darker. He said that after meeting Nichol, he felt like something had taken over him. That he started having dreams he couldn't explain. Visions. A feeling that he was being led. He said he believed she had some kind of control over him. A pull he couldn't escape. He claimed, without evidence, without logic, that he had been influenced by forces he didn't understand. That Nichol had awakened something inside him he hadn't known existed. And then, buried deep in one letter, he wrote this. She wanted to give me a son someday, but Shannon had already done that. It was a sentence that stopped readers cold. One line. One quiet, loaded confession. A window into the mind of a man who had taken away his unborn child. And placed that decision beside the desires of another woman. He never said Nichol asked for it. He never said she even knew. But the implication hung heavy. Because by his own words, he had viewed his pregnant wife as a barrier. And Nichol, as a future. He also admitted things he hadn't told the police. That he had tried to strangle Shannon once before. That the idea had been forming for weeks. That he had searched Google for the most painless way to kill. That he had planned it. He said, I thought if I took her out of the picture, Nikki and I could be together. Chris didn't just write about guilt. He didn't just mourn what he lost. He returned again and again to one topic that caught investigators off guard. Something no one expected from a man already behind bars, a man with nothing left to protect. He started talking about Nichol's life. Not the one she presented in interviews. Not the one that was printed in news articles or repeated in police transcripts. But the one he claimed she tried to keep hidden. In one of his letters to Sherilyn Cadle, Chris made a statement that would send shockwaves through anyone still following the case. He said this. There were things Nikki told me, things about her and her friends. Things they were into. And I should have walked away then. But I didn't. I couldn't. He didn't go into full detail. Not in plain language. But between the lines, through the way he wrote, what he avoided, how he trailed off mid-thought, it was clear. He believed there was more to Nichol Kessinger than anyone knew. That the people she surrounded herself with weren't just coworkers or gym friends. That there was another layer. One she had never admitted to. One he couldn't forget. In the margins of one letter, nearly scratched out, he added something more. She had a friend who practiced things. I don't know what it was exactly, but it wasn't normal. She said it was harmless. Energy work. Rituals. I didn't like it. I felt weird around them. But she laughed it off. Said I was too uptight. Rituals. Energy work. Friends who made him uncomfortable. It could have meant anything. Or nothing. But this wasn't a man prone to exaggeration. Chris Watts was cold. Direct. Calculated. And if he was trying to shift blame, he could have pointed anywhere. Instead, he kept circling the same person. Nichol. He claimed that she opened doors in his mind. That after being with her, he felt different. Like he couldn't sleep. Like his thoughts weren't his own. Like his body was doing things his conscience couldn't stop. He said it wasn't like him. That he had never felt that way before. That something changed. Some PO. Others aren't so sure. Because what does it mean when a man kills his entire family, and the one thing he clings to months, even years later, isn't just the affair, but the feeling that the woman he loved was involved in something he couldn't explain? Chris wrote about conversations with Nichol's friend. Late nights. Things said in passing. Mentions of beliefs, practices, symbols. Things he didn't understand but remembered. He said there were books in her apartment he didn't recognize. Stones on her shelves. Symbols he couldn't place. And once, just once, he said he heard her whisper something in another language during a meditation session, and it chilled him. He didn't know if it meant anything. He never accused her of anything illegal. But it never left his mind. He said, I don't know what she was part of. But I wasn't ready for it. And I think part of me gave up trying to be. But what did Nikki know? That part he never fully answered. He danced around it. He said she wasn't involved. But he also said she'd been asking questions. Pressuring him. Wanting commitment. Telling him she couldn't be with a man who was still tied to another life. She wanted a clean start. A future. No obligations. No children from a past relationship to deal with. It's what she said? Or maybe, what he heard. And so, in his own distorted logic, he made a decision. A decision that left a trail of destruction stretching far beyond his prison walls. He wrote these things not in fear. Not in anger. But in a voice that sounded almost mournful. As if he knew whatever he had been pulled into was too big to undo. So what does it mean? Did Chris Watts murder his family because of an affair? Or was he trying to win someone's approval at any cost? And what did Nichol Kessinger really believe? About him? About herself? About the life she said she wanted to build? The FBI questioned her. The CBI asked her hard questions. She gave statements. She said she was in the dark. That she never wanted harm. That she was misled. And yet, there's silence surrounding her closest relationships. No friends came forward publicly. No one from her circle stepped up to defend her. One name in particular, the friend Chris hinted about, never surfaced. Her identity? Still unknown. No interviews. No clarifications. No denial. And perhaps that's the most unnerving detail of all. Because it's one thing to fall in love with the wrong person. It's another to lose your soul trying to please them. Chris Watts says he acted alone. The courts agreed. But his letters suggest a belief that something far more complicated was happening. That he was being watched. Influenced. Shaped into someone else. Not with commands. Not with threats. But with subtle power. Emotional control. Silent pressure. And a darkness he didn't recognize until it was far too late. So what was Nichol Kessinger's truth? The world may never hear it from her lips. But through Chris's final words, through the things he wrote when no one was looking, one terrifying suggestion remains. He didn't kill to escape. He killed to transform. And what he was trying to become was everything she wanted him to be. From the outside, the story seemed over. A man confessed. A sentence was delivered. Graves were filled, and headlines moved on. But beneath the surface, it never really ended. It just grew quieter. More questions surfaced, not just about motive, but about manipulation, about belief, about influence. And about what Chris Watts was willing to give away, piece by piece, to hold on to a woman who may never have even loved him. Because what remains most unsettling about this case isn't just the murders themselves. It's how willingly he erased a family, how fast he shed his past, how completely he immersed himself in a fantasy life with someone he'd only just begun to know. And it's how eerily absent emotion is in every part of his explanation. Chris Watts didn't rage. He didn't beg. He didn't stumble through his lies. He transitioned. From husband to killer. From father to executioner. All in silence. All for a future that never came. And yet, the name that endures alongside his is still hers. Nichol. A woman who claimed no involvement. No knowledge. No guilt. She answered every question. Cleared every test. She walked out of the investigation with her freedom. And in the eyes of the law, that was where her responsibility ended. But in the court of public opinion, the case had only just begun. Because when people went back and listened, really listened, to her interviews, a pattern emerged. A pause here. A word repeated too often. A timeline that shifted just slightly from one retelling to the next. Her internet history revealed things she never told police. Her voice trembled in odd places, when discussing Shanann's children, when saying Chris's name, when asked about her own motivations. And there was that one phrase. The one that lingered. I just wanted to be his only one. It wasn't a crime to say it. It wasn't evidence of anything. But when placed beside everything else, the lies she admitted to, the messages she deleted, the speed with which she tried to erase her digital footprint, those words took on weight. Because that was exactly what she became. The only one. And that's why the questions won't go away. Why did she delete so much? Why did she lie about what she knew and when she knew it? Why did she say Sean was just a name on a screen, when friends later recalled Nichol mentioning Chris's wife early on? And why did Chris fixate on her so deeply? In prison, he still won't say a bad word about her. Even after she condemned him. Even after she vanished. He speaks of her like a figure out of reach, unreachable, untouchable. He says he doesn't blame her. He says she deserves peace. He still uses the word love. But love doesn't erase children. It doesn't fill oil tanks. It doesn't silence a pregnant woman whose only crime was believing her marriage could be saved. So what was it really? What did she offer him that made everything else disposable? Was it attention? Was it validation? Or was it the illusion of control, after years of feeling small, powerless, invisible? Chris Watts didn't kill out of impulse. He planned it. And if his letters mean anything, if they're more than just the delusions of a guilty man, they suggest something deeper than lust. They suggest that he thought Nichol Kessinger offered him a way out. A complete reset. A world where he could exist without being questioned. Without being needed. Without being accountable. And when she started hinting at what that future could look like, he did what she never asked him to do, but what he believed she needed him to do. He cleared the path. No matter the cost. He calls it his biggest regret. But he doesn't cry when he says it. He doesn't shake. He speaks about it like he's remembering a job interview that went wrong. Like it's something that happened to someone else. And maybe in his mind it did. Maybe the man who walked into that house and silenced his daughters was already someone else entirely. The version of himself he created to keep her. A version that would never cry, never plead, never say no. The version she would stay for. And that version now sits behind bars. Worshipping a ghost. Writing to strangers. Still wondering if, someday, she'll reach out. But she won't. Because Nichol Kessinger didn't disappear in the shadows. She stepped out of the frame and never looked back. And the truth Chris Watts can never face is this. She walked away from the fire he lit. And let him burn alone. Narrator, finale, 50 to 55 minutes. Some stories end with closure. This one never will. Because the truth in cases like this doesn't rest in a single moment. It drips out slowly, through interviews, documents, letters from a concrete cell. Through the quiet click of a deleted message. Through the silence that followed every call Nichol Kessinger never returned. Chris Watts sits exactly where he belongs. But justice and understanding are not the same thing. Justice is served in court. Understanding, that's where we're left standing, still searching for the missing pieces. Did Nichol know more? Did she want more? Did she say the one thing he was desperate to hear? We may never know. She has her freedom. She has her silence. And he has the story he made, one that destroyed everything in its path, in the hope of creating something new. In the end, Chris Watts believed he could build a future on the ashes of a past he refused to face. But fire doesn't purify. It devours. And the only thing left now is smoke.